All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this week's podcast. I'm thrilled to actually have one of my tax rep members on. But what's special about Josh Kirk is the fact that he's also a former revenue officer. And in going back and forth with Josh, I thought, you know what, we really need to do a podcast on this because there's some interesting, there'll be information that he has that I think a lot of you would like to hear. What is the thought process that goes on the other side of the phone, or the other end of the phone, or the other side of the table? So joining us obviously is Josh Kirk. Josh was at Rutgers as a finance major, then goes into the IRS. I don't know why, but we'll get there. Spends a number of years doing that, and now is been actually in the tax software industry, both at Thomson Reuters and now at Intuit. And like I said, he's one of our tax rep community. I'm thrilled to have him on. So Josh, listen, thank you for coming on. Welcome to the program.
My pleasure. My pleasure, Eric. Once a lifetime opportunity. So thanks, man.
That's not true, but anyway.
Okay, we'll see about that, right? Okay.
But so the question I kind of already threw out there. You're at Rutgers, right? You're a finance major, and most finance guys they're thinking about Wall Street, MBA.
Absolutely.
How the hell do you become a revenue officer?
All right. And so it's interesting. So the year was, I'm going to bring us way back here, so get ready. Year was 1996. I was actually a student at Berklee College of Music in Boston, right there on Boylston Street, which I don't know if that puts us in Boston about the same time. I don't know when you were at BU.
I grew up in Holliston, Mass. I graduated undergrad in 93, and I was in law school 99 to 2003.
Okay, so right before then, I'm a student at Berklee. I'm a performance major and doing the whole starving artist thing, and just had a blast. Flat broke a lot of the times, but just having an absolute blast in Boston. But I did decide at some point that, money was kind of important. I needed money to get in the studio. I needed money for music equipment. So I decided to switch over to business school and get a business degree. So I enrolled at Rutgers University, which is where I'm from, New Jersey originally. And at the end of my 4 years, I did do an internship actually with Oppenheimer, on Wall Street and everything. And just saw stockbrokers the markets were up and down, stockbrokers flipping out on a daily basis. I was like, geez, I just don't know if this is for me. I don't know if I want to be that stressed out on a daily basis. I could sell and everything like that, but I just wanted to have a little more control over any product that I decide to sell if I decide to get into sales. And so I said, let me explore other opportunities. Well, the only other opportunity really that panned out was a job as a revenue officer. And the whole time, even though I'd gone to music school and left, I still had an idea of when I graduated business school, I was going to start a band. So really, working as a revenue officer was a chance for me to get up to New York and work a day job and then play in a band at night, really. On weekends, stuff like that. So that's what I did. And so I was in New York for a couple of years, and then I got a promotion. I moved down to Miami.
So I get the Oppenheimer thing, to be honest with you. I get the stockbroker thing. I wouldn't want to do that. You're talking about sales. But it's a tough market, and and let me tell you, we have members who do financial services. We have a lot of CPAs who go and get their CFPs. You know what the difference is? The accountants are viewed as trusted advisor. Stockbrokers are viewed as salesmen.
Right.
And so accountants do really have an advantage when it comes to that kind of a relationship where they can say, look, why don't we look at your insurance needs? Why don't we look at where your investments are, versus the stockbroker who's either calling or getting a referral. And I mean, I can tell you right now, when we looked at our 401k, we brought in 4 different firms to look at. So it's a much more competitive and much more stressful place to be. So, and I know you're a CPA. Did you get, so obviously you didn't get that before becoming a revenue officer. You obviously did that, I am assuming, afterward.
much later afterwards. Yeah, I didn't get licensed until 2016. I had left the IRS at 2008, and it's funny how it happened. I left the IRS. I was in Florida, and I really wasn't even sure what I was going to do after that point, tax or otherwise, career-wise. And so we were out in Florida, my wife and I, and at that time, one child. We found out my mother-in-law, who was out in California, was coming out to Texas, so we joined her in Texas. We moved out here. I've been out here for about 10 years now. And so one thing led to another. I didn't even know that Dallas, the Dallas metro where I'm at right now, is the place where there are, at least 4 different tax software vendors headquarters. So in terms of career opportunities in that specific industry, I hit the jackpot really without even knowing. I mean, I just got lucky as ever on that one. So
actually, that's interesting. I hadn't even thought of that, but you're right. I mean, Intuit is there, Thomson Reuters is there.
You got CCH, Corp Tax.
I always think of CCH as in Riverwoods in Illinois, which I think is the main office. But you're right; they do have a huge,
absolutely,
a huge office. Yeah, no, wow,
it is. So yeah, the stars lined up for sure on that one. And so I'd come out here, and I had actually taken another internship at Thomson Reuters just in support, just to get my foot in the door, and in support. And then I had taken a position in sales for another couple of years, just sold every product that they had, sales tax, property tax, transfer pricing, income tax, state apportionment, just their whole product suite. And decided at that time, after seeing a number of the other salespeople with their CPA license, I said, gosh, it's something I should really explore. And then ultimately, my choices long-term were between, product development or sales. I ended up in product development. I thought that was a little better fit long-term. But by that time, I'd gone back for a master's in taxation because I was going to do that either way. I was going to get my master's in tax because the company was paying for it. So I said, hey, if I'm not doing that, I'm kind of giving money away, tuition reimbursement. So I did that. And then, and then I got licensed. After I actually got into product development, my manager, who was a CPA, actually signed off on my experience certification. So I didn't even get my experience in public accounting. I got it through product development. Yeah, it was a really interesting. It was a really interesting route.
It's funny. It's funny how our paths take us to the. I never thought I'd be doing what I'm doing. I went into accounting. I was going to get an MBA. I was going to go to Wall Street. I want to do M&A deals, and the economy tanked, and it's just I ended up taking all kinds of detours, as most people.
You build on it.
Yeah. So listen, let's get. Obviously, as much as you've done some really cool stuff, but the RO. Experience. What was it like being a revenue officer? I myself have never actually been inside the government. Though I've dealt with them for 20 years, I've never been on the other side. So what is it like as a revenue officer?
The best way I can describe it, because I had done it for 3 years and 8 months was the total that I was there. And so I hadn't, I hadn't gotten to grade 12, which at the time was the highest level. They'd actually made a grade 13, but I'd reached grade 11. And so during that time, the best way I can really describe it is you're kind of like a traveling salesperson, kind of selling a product that nobody wants to buy. Really is the best way I can kind of describe it. Because
that's funny, but true.
Yeah, really. Yeah, it is, because you're going door to door, not door to door in the sense of knocking from one house to another or one business to another, but that's what you're doing. You're showing up unannounced, kind of like a door to door salesperson. You're driving around looking for these places that you've never been to, and that was really the toughest part about it. Each place you're going to, it's like, gosh, I had started in Manhattan, completely unfamiliar with New York, and you get there and it's not too bad to manage. The avenues go north and south, the streets go east and west.
Right.
You learn pretty quick, but still you're still looking for new places, so it's very stressful just finding a place. Later on, when I had moved down to Miami, you're driving around. So I'm like, gosh, I hope I don't get in an accident just looking for a place. I'm sitting there looking, I better keep looking at the road because I'm looking over at the side trying to find these new places. And so it can be really stressful just finding a place. And then once you finally get there, you feel this sense of relief that you've actually gotten there. But then you're like, wait a minute, I'm not done. I haven't even started yet. So I need to go and show up unannounced and whip my badge out and, and then the stress level kind of escalates from that interaction because you're having this whole awkward, really, really awkward interaction with the person showing up unannounced and that kind of thing. So yeah, it can be stressful.
Now, and you're right. I mean, no one ever says, "Oh, great, hon, look, the revenue officer's here." So, but I do have a question because I get this a lot. Like, and there's a part of me that feels this way. If RO showed up and said, "All right, you know what, Mr. So-and-so, here's what you got to do. First of all, you got to get into compliance. Do this, do this, do this."
Right.
What I have found is, and they may do that from time to time, maybe if they're asked, but for the most part, what I have found is the ones who have been, the folks that I know who've been there a long time, it's almost like, I would almost suggest it's sort of like litigators, seasoned litigators, or doctors or nurses. You kind of become immune to it after a while. And so what I find is, they don't want to explain everything. They are said, hey, I'm here, whatever, because, and of course, many of these taxpayers, well, not all, but many, don't really know what they're supposed to do. Now, there are a lot of them who've been through the ringer a number of times, which, what, it's funny, and I don't know, Josh, if you found this, because, between the move,
right,
it's like the same 200 people that keep coming through our door, right? It's like, I mean, I was talking with one of our settlement officers, and she said, Eric, it's the same 100 people. It's the files get closed, they go 6 months, here they come back again. And it's just over and over, and it's
That's
true.
like your cue.
I talked about this a lot, and I don't know if you were at the New England Rep Conference that we did at Fox, but I mentioned this. One of my former senior partners, I had these clients who we fought with. We used to have 4 revenue officers in Connecticut. We used to refer to as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And they were they were brutal. They were all pre-98. And as far as they were concerned, the 98 Act was the worst thing that ever happened. And they tell you point blank, if I could just go take this guy's house, this would be over 1, 2, 3. I'm like, well, unfortunately you can't. So we got to work this out.
That was a huge game changer.
Game changer. And, but we finally get this company into an installment agreement. 4 months later, I get all the default notices. I'm like, oh, here we go. Call them up, and long and the short of it is, we get them. I call the revenue officer, and he's like, no, Eric, we're going to start all over again. I need an 433A, 433B. I need a year of bank statements, whatever. I'm like, a year? You already have 8 months of it. Whatever, it doesn't matter. We go, and I'm walking around my office fuming, right? Fuming, like stupid clients.
Sure.
And my former senior partner Bob Percy, and I got to have him on to just tell stupid stories, but Bob looks at me. He's like, Eric, we love stupid people. Stupid people are going to pay for your 3 daughters' weddings. They're going to fund your retirement. Right. They're going to buy your second home. And he said to me, don't think of them as stupid people. Think of them as walking annuities. And that's what it is. And now listen, I do have some clients that have had horrific things happen to them I would never wish on anyone. And then I've got people who just can't get their shit together. And
you can tell them a million times, yeah, they won't listen.
They just don't. They don't listen. Now, with that experience, what was it like when you were an RO? And I'm curious that when you came out and now looked at it from the other side, do you think the ROs have a very clear picture? Because my sense sometimes is that, like, they don't say, well, why don't you just get into compliance? Well, they don't have it. I mean, they just can't. And it's I'm just curious about your experience being inside and then coming out and looking at it from the outside.
So I started with 10 revenue officers, trainees. And by the time a couple of years went by, there were 5 left. So half of them had actually gone over into becoming revenue agents. And so, the number had dwindled down by half. I think with the people that get, I don't know if I want to use stuck there, but I think, long term, you actually, like, this reality sets in, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm going to be like doing this for the rest of my life. And I feel like, you know, like they probably experience like a constant disbelief that they even have to handle like the job responsibilities that they need to handle. And there's like, not denial, but there's a certain sense of, bitterness and resentment probably that sets in. Like, hey, like they're the victim. It's kind of like flip flop. Like, I can't believe I have to deal with this kind of attitude.
And
Yeah.
we do get that. The RO that'll tell me I pay my taxes. I'm like, well, you have no choice. But that's beside the point, you know.
Right.
But no, but but it is interesting though, and I would think it being a revenue agent, in many ways, and I'm going to ask you this: is there any rewarding feeling to it? Because even if you collect, let's say you get the case and you get it resolved, then you get full pay.
Right.
There's just another case. I will tell you, I do get that sense of it's unending. The inventory is unending.
It sets in. It's kind of like quicksand. And we even had managers tell us that. It's like, hey, congratulations, you close the case. You get another case as a reward. But as a new RO, see, from my experience personally, I because people, managers and so forth, kind of caught wind that I was an RO during the day and I was kind of playing the band at night. So they kind of pegged me as like probably not the not so serious one. And so I always had to fight for my job. Like, I even was denied a promotion when everybody else got promoted. But then later on, I had gotten a promotion. I had actually gotten 2 promotions. But I had to fight, fight for respect and fight for my job. But I think how you do that, how you stay with the IRS a long time, and you hear about, hey, it's lifetime employment. You can stay with the IRS for life. It's a job for life, right? That's one of the first things people would say. That's a typical response. When you talk to people, hey, oh yeah, employment for life. Yeah, you always work. You always have work. The way you do that is you follow the IRM and you keep your overage cases down, and that's only going to happen when people pay. So for a new RO, from my experience, it was, gosh, I felt like a kid at Christmas or something, getting a Christmas present, and you had to get a check from somebody. You're like, oh my gosh, they actually paid,
Yep.
And
that wears off.
And then it wears off. It wears off. The time goes by, and the kind of like bitterness sets in. Because I think right around probably that 2-3 year mark, I think something happens. At least something began to happen with me psychologically, where my whole reality began to feel very surreal, and I didn't know. Gosh, I'd have a conversation with like my mother, and I'd feel like she was lying to me or something. I began to be very paranoid. And you never know when people were lying to you or telling you the truth. You talk to people and they sound like they're telling the truth, and so I decided at that point to really re-explore my career options. I was like, I don't know if I want to deal with that kind of like, this surreal reality that I'm living in for life, and get to the end of my career and say like, that was my whole career. And for me, it was to move on. But for a lot of people who stay around, I think that acceptance that is their reality of just never having a conversation with people that they can bank on 100% that really means anything. They start to become very, I guess, bitter and desensitized are probably the best words I can use. And so, most people, I mean, most ROs or most people for that matter, in any walk of life, they don't really have the ability to really, I don't know if I would say they don't have the ability, but you see a lot where people bring baggage from the past into their current relationships. And, I think that that's a lot of times what would happen with the ROs. They've been lied to and tricked and fooled, hundreds of times, almost on a daily basis. And, it starts to feel like,
You'd start to get jaded.
Yeah, you start to get very jaded. Exactly, exactly. And so then there comes along you with your new client. You're like, hey, I don't have anything to do with the past, you know, 10,000 people you dealt with. You know, I just want to get this resolved, you know, but they don't have the ability to hit that reset button to start fresh with you and a fresh relationship on a, you know, on a professional setting that has absolutely nothing to do with the past. Most people don't have the ability to hit that reset button, or at least a lot of people don't. I don't know if I'd say most people, just a lot of people don't.
Yeah, no, I get that. So are there any particular stories that stand out?
For me as an RO, I would say a couple in particular, and it's funny because both of the stories that stand out have to do with doctors. Um, one of them, I was doing the 4180 interview in my office, and it was a doctor where, you know, their practice was still going. I actually visited their practice on a field visit, and they had clients, and it seemed like they were doing okay. But she was part of a practice where it was a number of doctors as the partners. I think it was a partner in the partnership. And so I had called her into the office to do a 4180 interview, and she just began breaking down, crying, like right in my office. And I think that she was maybe not the only person who cried, but I just remembered experiencing in that moment like a feeling of, God, I wish I could help this person. I wish I could tell him. I wish I had something to tell him that could help him. You know, that's like the natural human reaction. God, I wish I could help him out. I'm crying or something. But, you know, you just had to stay with the interview. And I remember thinking myself in the interview, gosh, you know, we teach our kids to be doctors and CPAs, and, you know, and I'm thinking, gosh, this person went and became a doctor, and look what happened with her life, all the trouble she got herself into after she became a doctor, you know, because of the business decision she made. And I was like, gosh, you know, do we teach our kids the right things? You know,
Well,
is it really the right thing to teach our kids?
I gotta tell you,
yeah,
because in medical school and even in law school, they don't teach you how to run a business. And so,
right.
you know, you have doctors who are probably very good doctors, but couldn't run a business to save their lives. In fact, in some law schools, I do know they now have like managing a law practice as a course, because you know, do you know how many lawyers get in trouble with the IOLTA? You know, messing around with the
Oh, I'm
client's
sure
funds.
tons.
Um, and you know, it's a real problem. And it's funny you bring up that story, because there's actually a book called Confession, which is what I call this podcast, but Confessions of a Tax Collector. And I'm
Okay.
mind blanking on the author's name, but he was an RO prior to '98, so it was a much different
Oh, I
game.
see. Sure, sure.
But he was also in Florida, and he talked about dealing with protesters, because Florida is the capital of tax protesting in the U.S.
Oh, is
They,
that
for some
right?
reason,
Okay.
oh yeah, apparently they seem to all collect down there, and either that or they're just out in the sun too long. I don't know what it is, but
But
a lot of protesters down in Florida. But he talks about very similar. The woman came in and just started crying, and you know, it was his, like, one of his last cases, and he was leaving, and he went back to his desk, and it was time to really, you know, move to seize the property. And he said he sat there and he looked down, he just wrote uncollectible, threw it in the drawer, threw it in the pile. He
that
said
was it.
he lost his stomach. He wasn't going to go take this woman's nursery, you know, daycare or whatever. um but no, I would think it would be a tough job. I mean, admittedly, there are some odd personalities, I think, that enjoy it, but for the
No, you
most part,
do.
yeah.
Yeah, you run across those.
Um, so listen, but mechanically, what happens when that new case gets assigned to you, right? So, I mean, do you get a whole file with it? Is it just simply like almost like an email, say, "Hey, you got this new case," and
New
is it all?
case.
I mean,
Yeah,
how does
you've
that work?
probably seen, if you you know, if you look through the IRM, you'll see references to ICS, which I believe was Integrated Collection System, maybe. And so that's really just a case management tool. So you get the new case in ICS, you see it there. I handled about 90, probably something 90% of, you know, payroll 941 cases, 941 and 940.
Yep.
So just really a handful of 1040, maybe a couple 1041, 1065 delinquent return cases, largely 941 payroll cases. Probably under, I would say 50,000. I mean, I had a couple cases get upwards of that. I remember my largest case was 500,000. But as a grade 11 revenue officer, you're about in that middle range where mostly they're under 50,000. Back when I was an RO, they could still, you could still not decide not to assess the trust fund recovery penalty if it was
Yep.
under $10,000. I remember you mentioned that that's really no longer the case. That's being assessed routinely now, regardless of dollar value. And but you would look for that of whether or not the trust fund recovery penalty was going to come into it. You would look to see, if it was on your way, if you had 3 stops to make, you're going to map out your route accordingly. And you get these, like, you've heard of like NMOD and BenFol.
Yep.
And things that ROs use to analyze the accounts. You get those, but it's kind of more like, I don't know, at least as a grade 11 revenue officer, it felt like more like a formality because of their lower dollar cases. And, you would have things tell you whether they were a semi-weekly depositor or a weekly depositor. They were always weekly depositors. I don't know if I ever came across a semi-weekly depositor just because of the dollar value of the cases, and they didn't have too many employees and too much volume of, federal tax deposits. You'd get things like that. You would get any returns to see which returns they didn't have filed. It's funny, in collections, they would tell you to ask for the prior delinquent returns, but don't put them into ICS, because then that's what causes a case to go over age because now you're waiting for this return that you actually put a footprint in the system now that we're actually looking for this return. Now we have to keep the case open, to look for it. So there could have been other returns that were outstanding and so forth, but you just ask for it. You don't actually put it into ICS as an open item that needs to be resolved before you close the case. So that's really the name of the game when you're an RO, is handling your overage cases. You follow the IRM and you handle your overage cases. If you can do those 2 things, you're looking at, being employed for a long time. And so you look at a case from the standpoint of, okay, what parts of the IRM might I have to touch, and how likely is it that I'm going to have to, handle this as an overage case at some point, which happens a lot of times when, you're doing multiple actions on a case. What's the likelihood that there are going to be multiple actions on this case? Delinquent returns, balance due, any criminal element. Of course, if they file an appeal, it pops out of your inventory. But, if I have to hold it in my inventory, what's the likelihood that I'm going to have to go into seizure? Is this a case where maybe they've defaulted on the prior installment agreement, where now it's more likely that they're going to have to do a seizure because, they just can't get this thing, resolved, that kind of thing. What's the likelihood of multiple actions? What's the likelihood of it going overage? That kind of thing.
Got it. So, I was going to ask you, but it sounds like there's a fair amount of pressure to move cases along and not let them get old.
There is, and some managers are more concerned about it than others. Some managers will let you slide with maybe a handful of overage cases. Some managers don't want any overage cases. So if you have, on average, say 80 or 90 or 100 collection cases open, some managers don't want any. And I remember other ROs talking about, well, I had, stories where they had inherited overage cases. It was already overage before they got it. And now, maybe if somebody else went on vacation and they had to take the case over or something of that nature, they inherited the overage case. But yeah, they would be pretty, if not, fairly aggressive, then they would be pretty, heavily aggressive on overage cases. Yeah, there's a pretty good pressure on it, from management. But you just got to make sure you're following the IRM.
Yeah, no, and you mentioned something. One thing I get a lot of is the RO showed up at my door. Why did they do that? What is this criminal? My understanding has been, and I think you've confirmed it, but let me ask.
Mm-hmm.
You are expected to go make a field visit, right? I mean, it's not like
Definitely.
it's not unusual. In fact, it's the norm.
It's definitely the norm. I would say in my time there, I only met one revenue officer who didn't send out who didn't make a field visit prior to, giving them, and when I say giving, I mean mailing. He was the only one who really mailed out the 1058 letter instead of actually delivering it in person through a field visit. So everybody else would just make the field visit. And he told me why, because there was a section of the IRM that he pointed to where I guess you have to make a field visit before you file returns under 6020B.
Yep.
So if you want to, prepare any of their delinquent returns on the business side, not through SFR, but on the business side, then you have to make a field visit. I guess they want a field visit because they have to do a head count. And so before you're preparing the 941s for them, they have to show up in person to do a head count at the business. So.
Yep. Nope. Nope. I get it. So was there, and again, you've touched on this a little bit, was there pressure to levy?
Definitely pressure to levy because, I was in, at the time, excuse me, I was in Manhattan. So, not too many businesses actually own the property that they were in. And, even if you were looking at a seizure, you weren't probably looking at full payment on seizure of their assets. Let's say if they owed $60,000. If you seize their assets, you're seizing $10,000 or $20,000 worth of assets. It's not going to full pay the case. So the lien attaching to any property, whether it was real property or personal property, in Manhattan where I worked, typically wasn't as strong of a factor in getting the case closed as the levy was. The levy was really, you open that envelope from, with a check from the bank, and you're like, you feel like you've got a scratch ticket or something. You're playing for $1 million or something. You're just like, let this thing be the thing that closes the case so I can get my manager off my back.
Right. Right. No, absolutely. So for the practitioners who are listening to this,
okay.
When that new collection client comes walking through the door, what are your thoughts as far as what would you do with what would be your advice in dealing with the new case that walks in?
I would definitely say, know your client, know if they've been with this, if they've dealt with this in the past, because if they have, then that increases the likelihood that there's a criminal element. Of course, when I was at the IRS, criminal really didn't want to get involved, certainly in every single case that could have gone criminal. They said, hey, we're only going to look at certain cases, we're kind of backlogged. And so, but there could be a criminal element potentially on a case.
Yep.
If there's recidivism, I think is the word that's used. If people are opening business and then shutting them down, then opening up and shutting them down, it's really the same business. They've just open it and close it, open it and close it. It's just under a new name. It's still got the same owners, possibly the same assets. So if you don't ask that, they might not tell you that up front. I guess that could happen potentially on a 941 case. You'd want to be cognizant of that in particular.
Yeah, no, exactly. I have found. So here's what I'll tell you. And if you're listening to this and don't do a lot of this work, I get a lot of where the client will show up. They tell me the story, right? Well, I fell a little behind, blah, blah, blah. Okay, no problem. I call the IRS and the revenue says, oh, Eric, listen, you're the third POA I've had. This has been going on for 1.5 years.
Right.
Oh, okay. And by the way, that they did this 2 years ago, right? And I'm like, no, I didn't. So now I will ask clients, and you can tell they're starting to skate over things. Well, you know, a little of this. I'm like, so listen, when I call the revenue officer, what is she going to tell me? And they'll actually clam up. They'll be like, oh, well, do you think I wasn't going to talk to the person? You know,
Right.
but I will tell you, I mean, now the criminal is doing more and more. And a lot of it is because of the structuring. Now that structuring is such a hot topic in the banking finance area, they are doing way more evasion of collection cases than I've ever seen. Like the first 16 years of my practice, I never saw an evasion of collection case. We have 4 of them in the office right now, criminal cases. From people
It
who
just
file
shot right up.
false financials, who are dealing in cash and structuring their deposits. Why? To evade. You know. So what happens is, you know, now CI shows up because they've got structuring, right? They've got these suspicious activity reports. Often the RO doesn't even refer it. It's the bank. The SARS come in and they show up and they'll say, well, we noticed these deposits. He'll say, well, I have to deal in cash. Why? Because the guy, this jerk at the IRS keeps levying me. Well, what you've just done is you've admitted to structuring, and that structuring is the affirmative act to evasion of collection.
Right.
And
you just sealed the deal right there.
oh yeah, no, and so defending these things are, and I have a case that it really shouldn't be criminal. It really shouldn't. They were dealing with the RO and they couldn't come to terms, but he's still making voluntary payments. Every month he's sending in voluntary payments, and they finally put him in an installment agreement, but the structuring came out and that's what he said. He told the 2 CIs that showed up, and they prosecuted him anyway. And I got to tell you, it kills me that they're prosecuting this guy, because and my law partner Lisa feels every bit as disgusted by it, because he was clearly trying to comply, and the assistant U.S. attorneys don't want to hear about it. And another thing I'm becoming a little bit jaded about. But no, they are
understandably.
Oh yeah, no, I mean it's so what do you do with the taxpayer? Because we do have this people that just can't get into compliance, and I'm not talking about a business, right? Because you don't have to. The IRS does not have to deal with a business. You can shut it down, right? I mean, but when it comes to like
Absolutely.
the individual, the 1040, or the self-employed person who just literally cannot, and we have this. I have people that come back every year. They just run up more debt, no matter how much we try. You know, and we always say, "Oh, we'll set them up," you know, and we'll set them up as an S corp. Well, they won't have the payroll taxes. I mean, what do you want me to tell you? It's just the truth of the matter is they just don't have it. They're not making enough. What do you?
Right. Yeah, you're trying to get blood from a stone. Right.
What did you end up doing with those cases? I mean, at some point, do you just be like, look, I can't keep just chasing this person for months on end? At some point, do you just close it?
So from my perspective, since I handled such a large degree of, you know, business cases, payroll cases, 941 cases, like I said, about 95%, what would often happen, probably more times than not, because in that 3 years and 8 months, I never seized any property. I just levied and got the case closed through a levy, really. You know, it's not until you start to get up in the grade 12 cases, largely for the most part, that you're looking at, you know, high enough dollar value where they can't get into an automatic, streamlined installment agreement. You know, of course, they changed that from 50 to 100,000 to make that a little easier for taxpayers. But from my perspective, you know, when I was working in downtown Manhattan, you know, since taxpayers didn't own the property they were in, if they couldn't get into compliance, if they couldn't pay, they would just skip town. They wouldn't respond, and then you would close the case out as unable to locate. You know, because who knows, maybe it was their CPA or their rep telling them to skip town, or maybe they did. Maybe their CPA or their representative wasn't telling them to skip town. They just did it anyway. But often that was the case. If they couldn't resolve the liability, like if they said, okay, I'm going to pay in 30 days and here I owe 20 grand and here's 5 grand as a good faith payment and I'll pay the other 15 grand in 30 days. Well, if you didn't get that payment in 30 days and you're sitting there waiting as the RO, and 30 days comes and the levy, you know, okay, you might get $1,000 from the levy. You still got $14,000 left. those are the people that would just skip town. They'd close up shop, and who knows, they'd move across town, under some other business name, and you'd never know the difference. They wouldn't leave a trail. That's on the business side. They could do that because they didn't own the property they were in. If you're stuck like a 1040 taxpayers, stuck in the house they live in to some degree, a lot of people are underwater on their mortgage and everything. They can't just pick up and move and that kind of thing. Then it becomes a different story. Then I guess you look at, collection alternatives like, okay, can you borrow against the house? But a lot of people these days have already done that. I know, me personally, I just refinanced my mortgage, this year. A lot of people have already taken that option. They're taking refis where they're getting cash out of, on a new mortgage. So they don't have the collection option against, okay, but let me just borrow it against the house. Here, I'll pay the IRS. It's tough. It's a tough call when you're on the personal side with 1040 liabilities, and they can't just pick up and move and skip town. They're stuck. It's not as easy. It's not as easy from that standpoint.
No, absolutely. So listen, Josh, I appreciate your coming on. So before I ask my last question, if anyone listening to this would like to talk to you, consult with you, has cases
Absolutely.
that they think you can help with, how do people get a hold of you?
So I am online, joshkirkcpa.com. Reach out to me. Give me a call. Reach me on my personal line. It's 214-664-3974 is my number. Joshua KRK at yahoo.com is my email address. So it's my first and last name without the I in my last name. So Joshua KRK at yahoo.com is the email. Reach out anytime.
Yep, and I know you're on LinkedIn too. So that's great. So listen, final question. If you were a practitioner now just starting to represent taxpayers in collection, what piece of advice would you want them to know that you wish you had known?
If I was just starting out, I would say, just breaking into the industry, you said that I already know.
Yeah. Let me tell you something. It's a tough question. I ask it a lot, and people are like, oh, it's a good question. I think compliance. I never thought about the compliance part, right? I mean, it was all the 433A and on the allowable expenses and the offer in 12 months versus 24. What I would throw out there, and now I'll just ask you if you agree. I think the most difficult part of these cases isn't the numbers. It isn't even getting along with the RO. I mean, a lot of them have become friends of mine. It's dealing with the client and their compliance, because these are folks who often have never been in compliance in their lives.
Right. No, definitely. I would say if you do anything, if there's nothing else you do, get your returns filed, because those are the biggest penalties. The failure to file, I think the biggest one I ever saw was $35,000. The other biggie that I can think of that I would say probably was the exception of the rule was directing payments towards the trust fund recovery penalty. Yep. Directing payments toward the trust fund portion of the 941 payroll taxes. I would say it was usually the exception that people would do that. Most practitioners didn't do that. And so, be an advocate for your client, direct the payment towards the trust fund, if possible, if you come across a 941 liability, so that they're not hit with the trust fund recovery penalty on the back end of the collection process.
No, I agree with that too. In fact, I gotta do a podcast just on Revenue Proc 2226, which is where you can direct, how the IRS should treat your voluntary payments. So, no, listen, Josh, thank you for coming on. Thank you for taking your time out. And of course, I'll see you by tax rep, and we'll definitely have you back, because it's good stuff, and it's good for people who don't do a lot of this or starting to build their practice in this area to have a sense of what is going on the government side. What is it like for the RO? And I will tell you, one of my approaches has been, when I call them, as long as we've dealt with each other somewhat, I started on personal stuff. And we're talking about this and that and the government and the president and Congress, whatever, the shutdown, whatever. And then by the time by the time we get to the case, they're usually in a better mood. And so,
No, definitely.
you know, and I say, oh, look,
Definitely.
I know we did this, and here, how about this? And then the other
You
thing
get,
too is, yeah, I'm sorry, go on.
there's an old saying, right? You get a lot more with honey than you do with water, right? Isn't that how the saying goes? That's definitely 100% true in the case of dealing with ROs. Most people treated me with, a lot of respect, and when they didn't, it didn't really, wasn't really productive to anybody to get the case closed, to get the case resolved. So it didn't really serve any purpose. So.
Yep, no, I agree. So listen, Josh, thank you for joining us. Everyone listening, thank you for tuning in again. And look, keep tuning in, keep building your practice. I'm going to put the contact, the links for Josh down in the description below. So if you want to get a hold of Josh for any reason, you can do that. And Josh, like I said, thanks for coming on, man.
Take care, Art. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Bye now.